Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the conclusions from the Resolution Foundation, who research into living standards for ordinary people. And their latest report is pointing out that 2024 is going to be quite messy, to use their term, for living standards. It adds extra credence to the notion of a May election and even suggests that if the Tories back out from that, they could be in real trouble. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So for the best part of a year now, I've been saying I can see a May 2024 election as the most likely. I felt that an election in 2023 would be better for the Tories, but I could understand how it's politically difficult to call an election over a year before you have to, when the polls are telling you you're going to get beaten really badly. I mean, why would you? But late 2024 would also be foolish because people are more aware of living standards in autumn than they are in spring. And the latest thinking from the Resolution Foundation just really adds to that body of evidence that things can only get worse by leaving the election until later, and that the Tories are actually actively trying to arrange things for a May election. For example, the report points out that on average, the higher interest rates this year actually made households better off because the returns on savings outstripped the higher mortgage bills. Now, I know what you're thinking. You were thinking, well, hang on a minute, there's loads of voters who will have copped for those higher mortgage bills because they ended their fixed rate term, but they don't have savings, so they only lost out. They didn't do well out of this year. It's like, yeah, that's right. This is an average. Averages across all households. But it is likely to include a disproportionate number of Conservative voters who would have those savings. Mind you, the report does also point out that households tend to have less debt these days, so higher interest rates are not as bad as they would have been at one time, and that the higher returns for savers arrived before higher costs for mortgage holders. So that's why 2023, again on average, not for individual people, meant that the higher interest rates was sort of a net win. But the same report, because if you thought it was bad this year, the same report says that 2024 is going to swing the other way, because you've got 1.5 million mortgage holders seeing those payments increase by an average of £1,800, with, of course, millions renting being hit as well. Because, you know, what we have to bear in mind is when we talked about higher interest rates this year and how it affected mortgage holders, the mortgage holders, it wasn't like affecting all mortgage holders. It was affecting the ones that had taken out a fixed rate mortgage term a few years ago. It came to an end this year after the real rise in interest rates, and then they got hit with those. Well, there are still others who are still on those fixed rate terms from a few years ago, and some of them are going to end this year. So there's way more mortgage holders just waiting to be hit. And I've said for months now, this is a problem which gets worse, as next year rolls on. Because in January, there'll be a load of people who come out of their fixed rate terms and have to get that average £1,800 increase in their mortgage payments. Then in February, another load, and in March, another load. Every month, another cohort of mortgage holders coming to the end of that fixed rate term and have the new higher rates unleashed upon them. And there's some people, and it mentions this in the article actually, some people will be saying at some point this year, because interest rates are supposed to come down a little bit later this year, oh, that'll be good for those mortgage holders. Like, no, it won't. They'll still be getting higher mortgage payments coming their way, just not as high as if the interest rate stayed high. That's all. It's like being charged an extra £400 a month instead of £500 sometimes. You know, basically, the sooner the election is held, the fewer mortgage holders cop for those higher payments before the election. The suggestion is that the only winners next year will be those who own their own homes outright and have substantial savings. And yes, this is a description of a core Conservative voter, but not enough of them to save the Tories. Especially when you consider that also these people, they might own their own homes, they might have savings, but these tend to be older people who are reliant on health and social care services, which are in complete disarray. But it was revealed this year that Labour's target voters tend to be a particular group of middle-aged mortgage-holding men, and there was a suggestion it could also include 40-something single mothers. Now, these are not going to get on with what 2024 has in store for them. So the Tories needed to sweeten the deal. And the only sweetener the Tories ever understand is tax cuts, We knew they were going to announce tax cuts for election year. They always attempt to bribe the public this way. And part of their attempts at bribery this time are for an early cut to national insurance in the new year. So basically, in a week's time, about a week's time, national insurance is getting cut. And you think, well, why are they cutting it early? Why don't they just wait? I mean, you know, when you have new tax arrangements, the start of the tax year is when they come into effect. So if you're going to change national insurance, it comes into effect in April. Why is it coming into effect in January? Well, I have discussed this when it was announced at the time. Although national insurance is being cut, income tax is being increased in real terms because the boundaries are remaining in place, which means with inflation, as people's incomes increases, it drags them into higher tax bands when in real terms they're not earning any more money. And the Resolution Foundation has done the maths on it now. So the national insurance cut coming next month will cost, they say, £10 billion. But it will only last until April for a lot of workers because they calculate that anyone earning up to £26,000 a year is going to see those national insurance savings swallowed up by the increase in real terms income tax when the new tax year begins. But millions of workers don't pay attention to the economic news and reports. And nor do they really pay much attention to the taxes, because if you're a salaried worker in the UK, it's your employer that sorts out your taxes. You don't have to do anything. You get your form, you know how much taxes you're spending if you're interested. But all you really see on a wage slip is your take-home pay. So most of these workers will not realise that their take-home pay has gone down until they see the wage slip where it goes down. And if there was one indicator that the Tories are betting the farm on a May election being it, this is it. They want people to see the increase in take-home pay in their February wage slips. So it comes into effect in January, so it's the February wage slips where they'll see it. But they don't want them to see it going back down again after the income tax rise. And if that comes into effect in April, when are they going to see that? In their May wage slips. So if you have an election on May the 2nd, that works, doesn't it? But for those who do pay attention to the economic news, the Resolution Foundation have an interesting calculation. So they say the national insurance cuts will cost £10 billion, but that the freezing of income tax bands will yield over £40 billion. So despite their 2019 manifesto promise, the Tories are raising income taxes by a net total of £30 billion. Oh, what's that? All those low tax Tories that said we will not support a government that raises the overall rate of tax, are they screaming about this? Liz Truss, Priti Patel? No, I can't hear a word. They seem fine with this. And this obviously means that there has to be, as a country, there has to be a lot of people that are going to be paying more. They're going to have that income, that national insurance tax cut swallowed by the income tax rise. And what it means is those earning below £26,000 are going to be much worse off. And of course, those are the earners least able to bear the burden. It also makes mention of the fact there's going to be some income support removed as well. So they're really going to get hit twice. But I'd also add something else. Now, ordinarily, I would say, look, the Tories don't really care about low earners. So from a strategic point of view for the election, doesn't really matter, does it? It's just the usual Tory behaviour. But in recent years, they've based their electoral strategy on winning over many of these voters. And that is why it's important that they have the election, because before those people see their take-home pay go down in May. Because for this election, just like in 2019, those voters are important to the Tories. The analysis shows that you benefit most from these tax cuts and rises if you earn 50,000. Now, possibly this is a case of the Tories paying attention to some of the voters that Labour have been successfully appealing to. But I will reiterate what I said in yesterday's video. A lot of people are taking signs like this as an indication that the Tories are going to call an election for May, because it's like obvious, isn't it? And like Labour's Emily Thornberry has now been describing the May election as Westminster's worst kept secret. Labour are really ramping up the expectations for the spring election. But what I see is the Tories are really pulling out the stops to give themselves the softest landing zone in May. They do want a May election. Their entire strategy is built towards a May election. That is true. But it's also built to test public reaction before they have to call it. Because if the polls are a disaster area in March, I can still see them delaying. Not because it will make sense to do so, but because they'll panic. It's obvious that the Tories are trying to bribe the electorate and that they expect the approval of those bribes to decline from May onwards. So they sort of know the way they've set it up. The appeal of these tax cuts is going to wane after May. So they've set it up for an election in April or May, or very early May at that. So yes, Sunak is trying for a May election. But like I said yesterday, what if we're in a recession? Like a technical recession for an economy that's been stagnant for 15 years doesn't actually mean anything economically, but it prompts unhelpful behaviour, because recessions tend to cause people to rein their spending in. People, when they see recession in the newspapers, they don't really think, well, is my income at risk or not? They just naturally think we ought to spend less. That causes further constriction of the economy. And we've already seen a serious cost of living crisis. The report shows that at the end of 2024, real terms incomes will be no higher than they were in 2006. Now, people won't remember what their standard of living felt like 18 years ago, a long time ago. Wouldn't it be a pity if Labour were to put out a campaign leaflet showing the difference, showing that your real terms income hasn't actually risen since Labour were in power? Only, of course, they won't compare it with 2006, because that was not peak. The peak year for Labour was 2008, just as the banking crash happened. Be a shame if they put that on a leaflet, wouldn't it? Finally, I will also just say that reading this report is a little bit weird. It's not revealing any major shocks. It's in line with economic analyses over the past year. It just, as we get closer, you can add some finer detail to the immediate future. But it not only shows how the Conservatives are, as I say, betting the farm on the conditions being best for a May election. They are erecting the scaffolding for a May election. That's clear. But it also highlights just what a hole we're in. And it's not just going to take a government that actually cares to sort this out. It's going to take an incredibly capable one. And they're going to have to do it when not only is the economy broken, but there are no projects in the pipeline which in a few years' time, they can finish off and will yield anything useful. They're going to have to start everything from scratch. All of our national infrastructure is almost going to have to start from scratch. And they've also got a situation where our political and social systems are completely broken as well. But it does at least mean that I can retain May as the most likely time for an election, because it's quite clear to me the Tories are absolutely trying to engineer that May election. So we may only have another 5 and a bit more months of the Tory clown show before they have to carry on their future seasons on the opposition benches. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.